Welcome to What's Your Job Worth? We're really happy to have people joining us today for this webinar and our discussion about how you can make the most out of your job and by utilizing benefits. In case you didn't already hear my spiel, we're really going to be using the group chat a lot. And that's where we want to see your questions. So you may have noticed that we muted you when you came in to the meeting. That's going to be the way it is. So you will be able to ask your questions though in the chat. And again, you can typically find that chat at the bottom of your screen if you just hover over it, or perhaps at the top of the screen. Any questions, like I said, anytime during the webinar, throw them in the chat box and we'll help you out and we'll try to answer your questions as we're presenting. So to introduce myself, I'm Kathy Sweetler. I work with University of Illinois Extension and I'm an educator here. And I'm really happy to bring this webinar and our series to you. And one other last thing I wanted to mention was we are recording this, and so just to keep that in mind, plus it'll be available later. And then also presenting today will be Pedro. Pedro, would you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Hi, thanks, Kathy. My name is Pedro. I'm a grad student at UIC and also a student money management support specialist in Chicago. So, nice to meet you.
Yeah, this is going to be great. So keep coming in, find your chat box, open it up, and we're going to kick this off, and I'm going to turn it back to Pedro for the first bit of the presentation. All
right, so let's kick it off. And if you could please enter the state and county that you're logging in from on the chat, it'll kind of help us out to kind of get an idea of where everyone's coming from. I'm in Chicago, by the way. All right, lots of champagne. Miami, cool. All right. Lots of people from Illinois. All right, so let's go over the learning objectives today. So the goal here is to identify the job benefits that are available for us, and then understand the basic value of them, kind of explore the role of retirement plans and what are the options out there, and also recognize the role of compound interest and how it can help us retire by saving early, and also knowing how to maximize job benefits in general to increase net worth and increase happiness, I guess, in some way. All right. So yeah, I just want to start off by saying that one of the reasons I decided to volunteer to host this, co-host this with Kathy, is because I'm graduating in December as a grad student, and I just went through a job search process myself. So it's kind of personal to me, and I think it's really useful to have this kind of discussion, because it's completely overwhelming sometimes to evaluate different job options, and I don't know how to prioritize and what are the benefits worth, right? So it'd be really helpful if you could enter in the chat where you are in the job seeking process. And yeah. Lots of have a job, some interviewing. Yeah, so why do benefits matter, right? Well, benefits are a huge part of the factors that you should evaluate when you're comparing jobs. We always talk about salary as like the main thing that we look at when we're comparing different jobs. The benefits are incredibly important too. It has to do with the things that you prioritize in life. So benefits could be a lot of things that have to do with your standard of living. And it also has to do with your retirement. So it's important to know what the options out there and what are the benefits that your employer is giving you in order to be able to take the most advantage of it while you're young and coming out of college in order to retire in a healthy and responsible way. What do you guys think could be some of the benefits that an employer might offer that you've heard of or that you think they should be offering? I don't know. Would you mind sharing with me some ideas in chat? Paid vacation. Yeah, paid vacation is huge. I love paid vacation. Health insurance is a huge one. Yeah, especially if you have a family. Yeah, that's massive. Retirement. Yeah, retirement's very important too. Tuition reimbursement, I like that too. Yeah, so yeah, you guys covered the main ones. So lots of options for retirement. So retirement plan can be in form of 401k or defined benefit. Vacation's also an important one that you guys touched on. Sick leave, also very crucial. Most employers offer that. Savings and investments is also important. So you touched on tuition reimbursement, but there are also a couple other ones like stock options. And some miscellaneous benefits that an employer might offer are some kind of wellness benefits, commuter, tax advantage like commuter benefits, different kinds of insurance. And actually, I'm going to pass it on to Kathy now because she's going to talk to us a little bit more about what are the insurance benefits that you might have. All right.
All right, thank you, Pedro. That was great to get us started off here. And as Pedro said, we're going to start off by talking about insurance because that is such a big piece of many employees' job benefit package. And some of these we're going to go over a little bit more quickly than others. We're going to talk about health insurance. That's one form. Two other things that some people have as benefits are dental and vision insurance. So that helps with those related costs. Disability insurance you may not be as familiar with, but disability insurance helps pay like an income if you are disabled and can't work at your job. So this is actually a really important one to consider, especially when you're young, because while the odds of it happening to you are relatively low, the effect could be huge if something happened to you or young and you couldn't work most of your life. So it tends to be pretty cheap insurance, but it's something to really think about. Life insurance, that's the one I always call death insurance because it only pays out when you die, but it is there to help support people who are dependent on your income, and unemployment insurance comes through your job in case you end up unemployed. But what we really are going to focus on and spend a little bit more energy around is the health insurance. All of these are important, but we're going to look at the health insurance one right now. So next slide, please. Oops. So basically, that was a little fast slide over there. So health insurance, as I was saying, it really can be a very valuable one, and it's one that's in the news a lot right now. So I think it's worth spending some extra time on it. So I would like to ask you all to go ahead and put in the chat box, how much do you think health insurance is worth as a benefit of employment? Or another way of looking at this, if your job didn't provide you with health insurance, how much would you have to pay for it on a monthly or annual basis? Let's talk about it annually. So what are your best guesstimates out there for how much it's worth as a benefit? You can put it in the chat box for me, please. Okay, $500 a month. I don't have a guess, but I'm hearing the horror stories. Absolutely. What do you all think? 500 a month, that'd be like, what, 6,000 a year? Does that sound on target? Higher, lower? It's okay to guess. Higher for a family. Good point, Jeanette. Typically the costs are higher when you're getting family coverage than individual coverage. All right, well, luckily we got people out there that calculate this stuff for us. So as you can see on the next slide, whoever guessed that $500, that was a great guess. So the Kaiser Family Foundation does this research every year and tracks for us how much the value of health benefit is. So right now it's running about $6,900 annually for single coverage and over $19,000 annually for family coverage. So that can be a big difference if you think about a job that is offering, if you have two different job offers and one offers a health benefits and one does not, then you really need to factor in this cost as well. And that's really a prime example of the difference that job benefits can make in our overall well-being financially. So what's happening with health benefits? Why is it so crazy in the news and are people, as you said, talking about these different horror stories? So looking at this next slide, you can see that the dark green represents premium increases, and premiums is the amount you pay for your health insurance each year. And then we've got overall inflation rate compared to workers' earnings, which is the lightest green. You can see in 2003 to 2008, premiums were just rocketing up there at a much higher rate than either inflation or worker earnings. And that's really what drove the Affordable Care Act, was this fear of what this was going to do to our economy and in individuals. Fast forwarding over to the last 5 years, you can see that the premium increases have really slowed down and are getting closer to the workers' earnings, which is the good news, although it is still expensive for people. Going on to the next slide now. What we can look at here is be aware that even when we say that an employer offers a job benefit like health insurance, that doesn't mean that you as an employee don't have to pay for part of the cost. Typically, employers, the worker pays some of it as well as the employer. And this is just illustrating what the different amounts are on average for single coverage versus family coverage, and depending on the type, the size of the firm that you are working at. But the main takeaway here is to be aware that there's a very good chance that you, as a single person, you would be spending over $1,000 as your part of the annual contribution for that health insurance. So, but again, a little better than the whole amount of over $6,000. All right, so what other things do we need to know about costs? One of the things that I put in this really techie slide here is that there is another cost that individuals have to pay and be aware of, and that's the annual deductible. The deductible is just like in a car insurance deductible. It's the amount you have to pay as the individual before the insurance starts to pay. And if you look at this graph from the last 10 years, from 2008 to now, the annual deductible has been increasing at a 212%. That's huge, especially compared to workers' earnings, which is over down there at 26%. So this is the piece that is really, I think, hurting people. This is an out-of-pocket expense that has to happen before insurance can kick in. So when you're looking at different choices of health insurance plans, make sure you look at what the deductible is and think about how are you going to be paying for this and what is affordable. And often we do have to make a choice between keeping the deductible lower, but also if it goes lower, then it's not unlikely, in fact, it's likely that your premium will go up a little bit. So there's that balancing act. And one of the things that I wanted to really focus on here and bring up is it would be a good idea to think about how are you going to save for that deductible. Now, every year you might not have to pay out the full amount of deductible, obviously, because you might not have medical expenses. But if you do, how would you pay for those? And we do have some help with these plans. So they're called health savings accounts, and another one kind is called a flexible savings account. Both of these, one of the main advantages is that they're funded with pre-tax dollars, meaning you get to use earnings before you pay taxes on them. So you would deposit money into these accounts with pre-tax dollars. They are different and they have different limitations and different a little bit of different advantages and disadvantages, and we're not going to get into all of that here in today's presentations, although you can take a look at this graph as I'm talking. But I mostly want you to know these exist. So when you start working and somebody says to you, are you interested in hearing about the flexible savings account we have for health expenses? Say yes. Ask them about it. Learn more about it and see if it's something that would be advantageous to you to help with paying for things like your deductibles and other medical expenses. All right, so moving on here. The other point that I really, as we're talking about job benefits, we're talking about it like everybody gets health insurance benefits or everybody gets retirement benefits, and that's not really true. So each employer gets to make decisions about which benefits they want to offer. So all employers don't have all benefits. The other thing is all workers at a company don't necessarily get the same benefit offers. So if you're talking to somebody, for example, that's been working in a company for 30 years and they're in top management, and they say, oh, I get this, this, and this benefits, that may not be the benefits that are offered to somebody starting out. So again, when you're exploring your different job offers, make sure that you ask questions about what are the job benefits that somebody coming in like myself would be offered so that you don't have any surprises on that line. Okay, so taking another look at that a little closer, this is an example of who has access to job benefits. In this chart, we're looking at who has access to things like retirement, medical care, life insurance for all workers, and then comparing that to people who are in management or professional jobs, which is just one way to break that out. These are really the top 3 things that workers have available to them. After that, the things that we were talking about, like dental and vision insurance, much smaller percentage of people are offered that. So just to, again, it's well worth it when you're looking at jobs or when you have a job to check with human resources and say, what are the benefits that I might be able to take advantage here, and see what they might be. A lot of times when I talk to people, they don't know, even if they've been working somewhere for 10 or more years, what are the benefits they could take advantage of. And they're really missing out on some positive things. Okay, so in this whole discussion or thought that you're going through as you're looking at different job benefits, you need to think about what kind of benefits do you need? What's important to you? What are your what has value to you? And the reason for this, a couple reasons, but one is when you first start a new job, you're going to probably be handed a large packet of benefits possibilities. And keep in mind that for many of these, there will be a piece that you have to contribute to, that you have to pay for. It might be subsidized by the employer, but still you have to pay. And you want to make sure that it fits into your budget. So you may have to prioritize things. So you may have to think to yourself, well, what is more important at this stage of life? Life insurance or disability insurance or other types of things like that. And so just keep that in mind as you are looking at these things. Sometimes if you have a partner, then you can look at the benefits that they're receiving at their workplace and balance it with what you are being offered and really maximize things. That's always wonderful when you can do that. Okay, I see lots of questions going by. I think that some of them are getting answered, but otherwise I'll catch up with them in a little bit too. But keep those going. We won't lose those. All right, next slide, please. All right, so the other big thing that's a benefit that a lot of people take advantage of is retirement plans that are offered at work. And so let's take a little time to focus on those. And okay, thank you. So there's different kinds of retirement plans, and I just want to give you a little background on this so when you're hearing discussions, it makes some sense to you. So there's the main 2 types is defined benefit and defined contribution. Defined benefit is kind of what we call our grandfather's retirement plan. So was what was typical in this country back a generation or 2. And that was the idea that you went to work with for a company, and when you retired, they would calculate out what your monthly pension was going to be based on like factors like your salary and how long you would work for them. And so that was sort of like the typical thing. Now you can see, looking at this table, that much more of the retirement plans are defined contribution. The difference here is the defined contribution, you have the option of putting money in, and the employer may put money in too. But rather than the employer having to bear the risk of paying out that pension on a monthly basis, your contribution and your retirement benefit will be based upon how well your investments do and how much money you've chosen to put in. So there's been a real shift in the risk and the responsibility here. In defined benefit, the risk is on the employer to make sure that the investments do well enough and enough money is put in so they can meet their obligation to pay out to people who retire. In defined contribution, the risk and the responsibility is on the employee, the worker, you, to make sure that you are participating fully so that you'll have enough to retire when you want to retire. So that's why this type of preparation while you're still young makes a big difference. Okay, moving on. The other reason that we really talk about using employer-sponsored retirement plans is that they have tax advantages. So for most plans that you would be offered at a workplace, you get to put away money before you pay taxes. So for example, if you had decided you were going to put $100 a month away or $100 a week or whatever, you would put that full amount away and it would be invested. You would not have to pay taxes on it first. Instead, if you thought to yourself, well, I'm going to take home $100 out of every paycheck and I'm going to invest it in the stock market and that'll go towards my retirement, you would pay taxes on it first. So here we're assuming a 28% tax rate. So you would actually have $72 to invest rather than the $100. So that's really, when people are talking about tax deferred savings, that's essentially what they're talking about. And in a tax deferred plan, typically you do pay taxes when you withdraw the money. So it's not like you get out of paying taxes, but you have the potential for more money to be earning returns. Okay, so what else do we need to know about this? Kind of just a chance to think about this and summarize it for yourself. When you are looking at all these different benefits and making choices, it's great if you can do that, some of that comparison when looking for a job. Doesn't always work out that way, but if you have the freedom where you've got 2 or 3 offers, then that's great to do that. Think about reviewing your budget before you choose which ones you want to, invest to take advantage of immediately. As I mentioned earlier, coordinate those benefits. And here's another really important one. Put it on your calendar, review your choices annually. You'd be surprised how fast things change in your life and how much that can impact the benefits that you want to take advantage of. So you really want it to be not something you decide once when you start a job, but something that you review and come back to so that you have that opportunity to, really maximize what you're doing. So what would these plans look like? They are, Pedro mentioned a 401k, and that's a very common one that's at a lot of businesses. A very similar thing if you work for a nonprofit or a state organization is a 403b. Don't get too worried when you are looking at reading things in the paper or online and you see lots of different names, because essentially there's a retirement plan for people in all kinds of different situations, and that's what all this alphabet soup is referring to. The IRS has these really bizarre titles, but you're not likely to be qualified for all of these. So if you're self-employed, you'd be looking at certain ones. If you work for one kind of business, you'll be offered one type. Another place, it'd be offered something else. University of Illinois, we call ours SIRS. So, it's just different titles for things. Don't let it overwhelm you. Okay. One other really important point to keep in mind is that at some organizations, when you put money into your retirement plan, the employer will match it. So for example, if it could be a dollar for dollar match, or it could be a percentage of that. But let's say that if you put $1 in and then the employer will put $1 in, that's like 100% return on investment right there. So when you are thinking about how much can you afford to put into a retirement plan at work, find out what the match is and try to stretch so that you can get that employer's match. And it won't be your whole salary or anything. It'll be a smaller amount by far. But it is a way to really give that boost to your investing and your savings. Okay. All right, so wow, we just covered a whole lot of different things there, and kind of looking at all that now, I'm sure that some of you are thinking, okay, it sounds basic, but I know that when I sit down and look at these job benefits, it's really confusing. And that's because they don't come looking exactly alike. It's often like you're looking at one organization's benefits and they don't quite match another organization's benefits. So let's try a little exercise to see if we can see how we could work through that and how we could compare job benefits. So here's a situation where we have a young woman. She has a child who's a preschooler, and she has 3 job offers, and the salary is exactly the same. But she is trying to figure out which job to take, job A, B, or C. And as you can see, they have slightly different, benefits attached to it. So take a look at this and think of which job would you suggest that Jenna takes, and why, and I'll look for some answers in the chat box. What do you think would be best for Jenna? Okay, I got anybody here that you want that wants a choice? So Paige is thinking maybe job A, which has a day of month of paid vacation, as well as a month of paid sick leave and on-site childcare, plus $100 discount monthly, and the option to buy group health insurance, which costs $300. Paige says she kind of likes that one because of the childcare. And sometimes some things like on-site childcare, while they also have a dollar value, they might also have a different kind of value where you have that option of you can go see the child in the middle of the day. You don't have as much traveling to do to drop off. Is anybody voting for job B? Get a free lunch daily, as well as a day, month off, and paid health insurance. Okay, Jeanette, job B, because of that health insurance, it's paid and not just having to pay it yourself. All right. Usually there's somebody that likes that free lunch, so that's why I was asking. And job C has more time off, it looks like, and contributions to a retirement plan of 5%, but not the health insurance. So that's why these things are hard to compare at times. But let's take a look at one way that you can help yourself, maybe by putting a dollar value to each one. Now, this won't give you the final answer, and of course, salary and the job and the place and all those things come into play, but when you start looking at the value of these, then it's another way of kind of looking at the pros and cons. There's not really a right answer to this question. I love asking questions that don't have right answers, but you can see that this is just a strategy that you could kind of put into play when you're looking at your own benefit offers and trying to choose which way you want to go. Okay, so we've talked about all these different things: retirement, health insurance, general job benefits. Pedro, take it away on our next topic here.
All right, thanks, Kathy. All right, so yeah, cost of living in different places is not really a job benefit, but it's something that's important and we should think about when we're talking about comparing two different jobs. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. So it can be vastly different, right? So we have this plot here showing how the different cost places vary across the country. So 100 would be the average cost of living. And so if you kind of like squint your eyes a little bit and look at Chicago, Chicago is right about 100, maybe a little bit on the expensive side. So if you moved somewhere like San Francisco or something like that, the cost of living there would be about 20% higher. But if you moved somewhere like in Georgia, maybe, then the cost of living would be like 20% lower. So the same amount of money that you get in different places can mean like completely different lifestyles depending on where you're living. So that's another like really important factor to consider when you're comparing different jobs. All right, let's talk a little bit about saving early. So saving early is super important. So that's like whenever you're thinking about planning for your retirement, this is definitely the first thing that you should think about. So it's important because money time is valuable, right? So money grows over time because of interest rates, and it doesn't grow linearly, it compounds. So that's what people talk about compounding interest. So money grows exponentially over time if you leave it in an investment account. So what that means really is that, for example, if you start with $100 in your bank account, after a year earning 5% interest, you have $105, right? But if you leave it there for another year, in the beginning you start with $105, but at the end you have $110.25. So what that means is the first year you get $5, the second year you get $5.25, so you get a little bit more, and it goes on like that. So every year you earn a little bit more than the year before. So when you talk about 30 years, like on this chart here, we're talking about $100 turning into over $400. So that's huge. So definitely start saving early. So another way to showcase this is this table here. So on this table, we're just summarizing two scenarios where one scenario, we have an early saver that just saves for the first 9 years of his job career. And the second saver saves for a longer period, so 35 years, but he starts saving when he's over 30 years old. So even though the early saver puts away only $36,000 and the late saver puts in $140,000 towards retirement, the early saver ends up with more money when they're retiring. So the difference between start saving early and later is massive. So you should definitely do the math and think about saving as early as you can, especially because earlier in life too, I think it's a little bit easier sometimes because life is a little simpler when we're young and it gets a little bit more complicated as we grow older. So, I mean, start saving early. All right. So another thing that you'll hear a lot about, especially when you're talking about like a financial planner or something like that, is the first thing they'll ask you about is what are your goals, right? So this is really important because we're not saving money just for the sake of saving money. We have things that we want to accomplish with this money. And our suggestion here is to turn your dreams or your goals into SMART goals, which is just a structured way of talking about your goals. So SMART goals are specific, they're measurable, they're agreed upon, they're realistic, and they're timely. And so what this means is, if you look at this table here, let's say you want to buy a house. So you don't want to buy like any house. We can make it more specific than that, right? Let's say you want to buy like a 2-bedroom house in Chicago. So for that, you need to be like more measurable. You want to be more measurable to your goal. So you need $6,000 to put a down payment on the house. And you also have a target date where you want to accomplish this, which is within the next 3 years. And so with this information, you know now that you have to save $167 a month or $42 a week. And this is helpful because you can compare this with your other goals and you can look back on the whole like variety of goals that you have and really assess if this is realistic for your budget or if you can adjust it somehow. Okay. Yeah, so we have some resources online that can help anyone who's interested to save money. And one of them is University of Illinois Saves. So this is a website where you can pledge a certain amount of money towards a goal. And why we offer this is because there's some real interesting research that shows that written goals are more likely to be achieved. And so this is a way of doing this. And even if you're not part of the University of Illinois system, you can go to americasaves.org and do the same thing. We also have other online learning resources as part of our financial literacy badges program. And by participating in this webinar, you are eligible for the financial literacy badge. This counts as one activity. So you can go to this website here, and we'll also put it on the chat, and take the quiz and see what you learned from this webinar. And we also have a bunch more resources if you follow this other link here, Go Illinois link. And you can learn a lot more about different topics that are just not only related to job benefits, but a whole gamut of things like budgeting, investment, retirement, student loans. So we have a lot of different resources that could be useful. And we thank you for participating in the last webinar for this year. And we'll have another webinar next year talking about identity theft and fraud, which is a pretty cool team considering the latest data breach from Starwood Hotels, so pretty current team. So that's on January 30th, 12 p.m. And yeah, and stay connected with us. We're on social media. We're YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And yeah, join our mailing list. We'll post a bunch of links and help you stay connected and learning about financial literacy. All right. Thank you. And thank you, Kathy. I think we can take questions now.
Yeah, this would be a great time to take questions. Thank you, Pedro. That was really good explanations. And I think we were worried at the beginning that we didn't have enough time, so we went pretty fast. So you know, and I know you're all listening intently. It's hard to listen and ask questions. So now's a great time. If you can put them in the chat, we'll be happy to take a little more time on those things that are important to you that you have questions about.
Jeanette earlier in the webinar had a really good question about the value of short-term disability versus long-term disability. So Kathy, you might be most able to kind of talk through what those different roles of those insurance types are.
Yeah, it's always one of the, and I saw some really good comments about the cost of different benefits and insurance things. And I think in insurance, it's so often a balancing act, kind of balancing the risk you're able or willing to take with the cost. So I think one of the things with disability insurance is to think about, well, I mean, ideally we would have coverage for whoever got disabled and it would be forever, right? That would be kind of like the dream, but that can be, as somebody pointed out, really quite expensive. Another way to look at it is more from like an economic point of view of like who is the top earner or whose income is really critical in terms of if they can't work. And then when somebody can't work, then you've lost that income, but you've also, and that person may also have increased costs in terms of health costs or daily living costs. And then when we're looking at it from that perspective of risk too, that's why I talk about it, especially for younger adults. I mean, if somebody is 62 and they become disabled, that's not good news, but they probably didn't lose that many years of their working life. But if somebody becomes disabled when they're 28, then that is a bigger issue, right, in terms of those working years. So I can't give you a hard and fast rule about like you should get short-term or you should get long-term disability insurance, but hopefully kind of thinking through those different variables and applying to your family or individual situation will help you kind of make those determinations. One thing I would always suggest whenever looking at something like insurance is to compare different policies at different companies. It may be that your employer, if they're subsidizing it, has the best offer, but sometimes that's not true. Sometimes it's better to go outside the workplace to get some kinds of insurance. So, compare at least 3 different companies before you make those kinds of decisions, especially if the costs are looking pretty high for you. Hopefully that helped a little bit. That's a great question. Other questions about different kinds of benefits? And looks like Andrea just put in, or somebody put in, a link to one of our websites that helps you kind of think about your risk management plan and how to put that together in a kind of holistic point of view.
I think one thing that might be beneficial, Pedro, when we were talking about this webinar, you talked about an example of cost of living, how one of your parents got offered the same amount of money in 2 very different locations. If you want to elaborate on that, that might be a better explanation of how much of a difference it can actually make in your living situation.
Yeah, my mom actually was thinking about the difference. She was applying for jobs, and she was applying for a job in Chicago, and she lives in Virginia right now, and the cost of living is like, I don't know, it's 50% more expensive to live in Chicago, and the salary she was offered in Chicago was similar, very comparable to the salary in Virginia. So I mean, it's just earning about 50% less money by making the move to Chicago. So this is the kind of decisions that you have to make. It can be really difficult.
Yeah, that's a great example. And we hear that often from different people too, that sometimes there's an assumption that, well, if I live in a more expensive place, they're going to pay me more. Sometimes that's true, sometimes not. So good thing to check out that cost of living index calculators. We also have a question here about negotiating and when can you negotiate? Do you do these things while you're accepting the offer, or when? It's definitely true, I think, that you have a little more leverage before you accept an offer. So, I think it's, from my point of view, there's no harm in saying, I'm really interested in this position, but I just feel like maybe the retirement benefits don't match up what I'm hearing from other employers. Can you offer this or this? Now, I know that in some organizations, certain kinds of benefits are just non-negotiable. It doesn't really Like, for example, at the university, it's very hard to negotiate retirement benefits. I don't know anybody that's been able to do that. But I know that when I worked in the nonprofit world, that negotiating things like time off was more negotiable, because the nonprofits didn't necessarily have the highest salaries, they had a little more flexibility, they were smaller, and they could perhaps give you more time off than they could do like more salary. So it's, again, one of the kind of the trade-offs is you kind of have to get a feel for what is negotiable in that industry or with that kind of an organization. And, I would, you may or may not be able to negotiate it. The more entry level you are, the less likely you are to be able to negotiate. As you move up in your work experience, you often have more room for negotiations. Anybody else want to jump in on that one? And
I would agree, and I would also say that you may not be able to negotiate benefits, but you can reevaluate them, which is something that Kathy or Pedro or both of you said earlier in the webinar. Just reassessing what's offered to you during open enrollment periods if you're already employed, or making sure to check those emails you get from HR on new opportunities to accomplish your goals. So those are ways to maximize your benefits that may not have to do with negotiation.
Yes, and piggybacking off that, if you're already working somewhere, especially in smaller businesses, sometimes the management just aren't aware of demand or certain kinds of benefit types. So, for example, maybe there isn't a flexible spending account for health expenses offered through your business, but that doesn't mean that as an employee you can't go to management and say, there's this thing called a flexible spending account. It would really help save us money on being able to use pre-tax dollars to pay for medical expenses. Have you thought about offering that? They might be willing to do that, just hasn't really come up for them, or they're unaware of it. So there are definitely a lot of benefits that are offered are driven by employee demand.
Yeah, and I like your point, Kathy, about coming from different sides on the negotiation. So sometimes maybe you can't negotiate on health insurance, but you can bring it up to negotiate on money, because it's all about money in the end, right? So you might not be able to get better health insurance, but you might be able to get a certain amount of money that covers your health insurance in a better way.
Yeah. So the more I hear about different benefit plans at different organizations, the more I realize how different they're organized and diverse they are, and how they kind of approach that, what you're saying, Pedro, of getting more value to people in different ways. Oh, other questions? These are great.
Are there any benefits that you've run across that we didn't talk about? I recently heard about someone being offered group pet insurance through their employer. So that's what I thought that was interesting.
Group health insurance?
Pet insurance, like for a dog or cat.
There's a new trend, right?
Bring your pet to work can also be kind of a nice benefit if you don't have to have a pet sitter or something like that.
Yeah.
Some places are willing to give people time off to increase their education or pay for pieces of the education, so that you can, build up your job skills or job knowledge. So that's another one that we really didn't cover. Access to wellness opportunities, whether they might be a physical gym or other wellness, like access to a nutritionist or things like that. Those are really trending. We're not seeing them at a large percentage of places, but I think it is a new trend that's happening.
As far as the additional education or professional development opportunities, I had a friend who worked for a very large company, and he recognized that his supervisor being unwilling to put money into his professional development held him back from getting raises and moving up in the company. So kind of assessing that when you're looking at different opportunities, different positions, how much are they willing to put into professional development, and how will that impact your long-term career, especially if you're in a career field where you're required to do continuing education or continual professional development.
Good points. I think, you know, it can feel kind of overwhelming when you're looking at all these different benefits. And just to kind of break it down, you know, take it piece by piece. You don't have to decide your whole life at once, but keeping in mind to try to balance your premiums and your deductible costs when you're looking at health insurance options. I think that's really important. Thinking about, can you start saving for the long term for retirement, and not feeling like you have to put away a lot of money at first, but just starting that process. Those would be two of the big takeaways that I hope people got from this webinar. And also the takeaway that there's a lot of different benefits out there, and it's good to review them throughout your life so that you can keep taking advantage of things as they change over. Okay, well, not hearing any more or seeing any more in the chat box, I think we'll go ahead and stop the recording here.